Hello, I hope you are all doing really well. Today I will be talking about the books that I read in April. And in April, apart from one, all the books that I read were by Australian authors because I was taking part in Aussie April, which is a readathon that was started by Doris from Aldi Books and Jacqueline from 6 Minutes for Me. I'll talk about the non-Australian book that I read first off. I had to read this book because I'd requested it from the library and it had been on hold for ages, and if I hadn't read it then I would have ended up back at the end of the queue at the library. This is Everything I Never Told You by Celeste. I read her book Little Fires Everywhere last year and really enjoyed it, and I'd heard a lot of people say that they preferred this book out of the two. I actually found that I enjoyed Little Fires Everywhere more. This is about a family in America, and right at the beginning of the book you find out that the middle child, Lydia, has drowned in the nearby lake, and so the book goes back and forward in time to before her drowning and afterwards from the point of view of every member of the family, the parents and her older brother and her younger sister, and we slowly piece together exactly what happened. I think the thing that kind of made me not want to pick up this book so much was because it is super depressing reading from the point of view of a character when you know that they're going to die. I know this is a kind of noir trope like Sunset Boulevard, but it's just really sad when it's a 16-year-old girl, and when you find out how sad her life was before she died and that it's the fault of her parents, that just makes it even worse. I definitely flew through this book. I think Celeste is an amazing writer in that her writing just flows so easily that you just become completely immersed in the story. There's definitely a lot in there about being a mixed-race Asian family in America. It was really interesting going back and reading the first novel of an author that I've really enjoyed before. Today I just finished Eileen by Tessa Moshfegh, and I loved My Year of Rest and Relaxation last year, and I've also found with Eileen that I didn't enjoy it nearly as much as her second novel, which makes me feel hopeful that even if this first novel that I'm trying to write is not that good, hopefully the practice will make my second one a lot better. Alright, now onto the Australian books. I'm gonna have to go through these books quite fast because I have to go out really soon and I don't have as much time to film as I thought I did. First up, I read Foreign Soil by Maxine Beneba Clarke. This is a series of short stories. As you probably all know by now, I don't get along with short stories very often, and sadly this collection was no exception to that. I did actually skip some stories that I was getting bored by, so I technically didn't read the whole book. The first story and the last story in the collection I really enjoyed, probably because they were set in Melbourne and so I had that kind of personal connection to them. I guess I don't really get the point of short stories that much. Every time I'm interested in one, I just wish it was a novel because I never feel like I get anything from something that's so short. So I don't really want to rate this book badly because I'm sure people who like short stories would like it. I think I just need to stop reading short story collections. Next, I read After Cynthia by Amy Witting. Amy Witting wrote one of my favourite books of all time, I for Isabel, and this copy I found on a recent op shop haul along with After Cynthia, and in two different op shops as well, which is really weird. I love this and its sequel so much, so I was sort of hoping that I would love anything that Amy Witting wrote. Sadly, that's not really the case. This is about a group of female teachers at a girls' school. The main character is called Jo, and it's kind of about her relationship with one of the students who is threatening suicide, which brings up stories from the past about another student that one of the teachers used to know, but it's kind of also just about the teacher's day-to-day and her relationship with a male teacher that joins them. It doesn't have a very strong plot and is quite wandering, which I don't really mind in a novel, but I didn't find the characters compelling enough to want to be in their heads. This is the last novel that Amy Witting wrote before she died, and I think she died just before it got published. And there are a few things in it that were a bit cringeworthy. Certain opinions that the characters profess were just a little bit dated. I think Amy Witting was a teacher, and so in that respect it did feel like an insight into her experiences teaching and being in staff rooms, but it's definitely a book that will be going back to the op shop. Next, I read Unpolished Gem by Alice Pung. This is a memoir from an Asian Australian writer. I saw her talk at a live podcast when I was in Melbourne and she spoke so eloquently I was really curious to read her book, which I found in an op shop. This wasn't quite what I was expecting. There's not really a lot about Alice herself in this book. She talks about being a child, but for the most part she talks about her experiences in relation to her grandmother and her parents, and also talks about their history of living in Cambodia and immigrating to Australia. It was really interesting to read about the Asian Australian community in Footscray during, I guess, the 80s and 90s. I sort of constantly felt at a distance from the book because Alice was not putting a lot of her own personal thoughts into it, which I guess is fine. but I feel like if you're writing a memoir, then you've kind of got to accept that you're going to be talking about yourself. Definitely worth a read if you don't know a lot about Asian Australian communities. I definitely learnt a lot in that respect, but I didn't quite gel with the writing style. Next, I read Looking for Ella Brandy by Melina Marchetta. This is an absolute Australian classic in terms of young adult fiction. It is about an Italian-Australian girl called Josie and her experiences going to a very exclusive private girls' school in Sydney and not fitting in because of being on a scholarship and being Italian. It was written in the 90s, so it very much is a snapshot of what it was like to be a teenager during that time before the internet. I saw the film a few years ago and I thought it was pretty good for an Australian film. Reading the book, I can definitely see how the movie just streamlined the plot a lot because this book just felt all over the place. Mainly, I did not enjoy the writing style. It was incredibly repetitive. It was written in the first person from Josie, and she just went on and on about the same things, and the characters very much told to us rather than shown to us. I vaguely remember the plot from the film, but the plot kind of just became hidden underneath Josie's constant repetitions about her feelings. I just found it incredibly annoying to read, and I kind of only pushed through because of it being an Australian classic, but if it had not been, I probably would have DNF'd it. Lastly, I read the first 2 books in the Seven Little Australians series. Seven Little Australians is basically Australia's equivalent of Little Women, and I have a feeling Ethel Turner, the author, was heavily influenced by Little Women. She even mentions Louisa May Alcott in the book. So this is about a family in the Edwardian era living in Sydney, and there are 7 children in total in the family. Their father is a captain in the army, and the mother of 6 of the children is dead, so they currently have a stepmother called Esther, who is very young, only in her early 20s, who has her own baby. And she has no idea how to look after this bunch of children, which age sort of between 4 years old and 16. The picture on the front of this cover is the author's daughter dressed up as the protagonist, Judy. And I would consider her one of the greatest characters in literature. So much so that the other characters just pale in comparison. And reading this now, after having loved it as a child, I just feel like Ethel Turner did not create the story that the character of Judy deserved. She's this 13-year-old child who just has this immense intelligence and humor and emotion to her, similar to Josephine March, also kind of similar to Sarah Crewe in A Little Princess. She just has that kind of otherworldliness to her. Now, everyone knows that Beth dies in Little Women, and anyone familiar with Australian literature knows that Judy dies in Seven Little Australians, and that is the biggest downfall of this book, is that Ethel Turner kills off her best character. It's a strange book reading it now, because it starts off very much in a kind of cheerful Edwardian children's book way and ends up being a total tragedy by the end. I don't really understand why Ethel Turner felt the need to kill Judy, aside from the fact that I feel like because Beth's death has such a massive impact in Little Women that she wanted to do the same in her own book. But this book is a lot shorter than Little Women, and also in Little Women every single character is fascinating. It's weird because the book goes to great lengths to show how Judy is such an important part of the family. The children are always getting into scrapes and their father is punishing them, and Judy eventually does something so that she gets sent to boarding school in the Blue Mountains, and there's whole chapters where she's absent and the rest of the children get up to all kinds of mischief that would never have happened if Judy was there to tell them that they were being stupid. And you feel like Ethel Turner is saying families should always stay together and not be pulled apart by aggressive fathers, but then she herself pulls the family apart at the end. Maybe she was trying to say that Judy's death would bring them all together, but it ends pretty much straight after she's died. And so then in this next book you kind of think, well, maybe we will see how her death has taught them all a lesson. But no, I found this book incredibly annoying because it was just all the much blander characters all being selfish and annoying for a whole book, and it felt like they hadn't learned anything from her death until the very end when it becomes kind of moralistic and religious. I'm complaining a lot. I really did enjoy rereading this first book. I still think it is worthy of its place as a classic of Australian literature, and I really did enjoy the Australianness of it. There's even a really interesting line where at the end of the book they go and visit Esther's relatives in the country on a big estate, and there is an Aboriginal man working there. He's definitely painted in a very positive light for books of this era, and one of the characters even implies in a sentence that the Aboriginal people looked after the land for thousands of years before British colonisation and that they did a much better job of it, which I think is a pretty amazing thing to read in an Australian book from the 1800s written by a white person. I would recommend reading Seven Little Australians if you do really enjoy children's classics. I'd only recommend reading the second one if you're really into reading books about Edwardian children doing bad things. There are 2 other books in the series, another one about the rest of the family all grown up, and the 4th one was written as a result of all her fans clamoring for more content about Judy. And so over 20 years later she wrote a book called Judy and Punch, which is about Judy's adventures in the Blue Mountains while she was at boarding school. I don't think those books are available new, so I'm going to have to find myself some secondhand copies because I'm in agreement with those fans and I really want some more Judy content. So sadly I did not read many books that I enjoyed in April, which is a shame because I love reading Australian books. Let me know below if you joined in Aussie April, and I will see you next time. Bye!